Professor Gopal Naik, Ms. Nandita Gupta, Mr. Samuel Praveen, Mr. Raste, and other dignitaries of the dais. First of all, let me thank you for letting me come and talk to you and address you on WDRA and warehousing related issues. And I must say that, look, I have not really come for a group discussion because I don't think that it's correct for me to discuss matters. I would rather speak my piece and move out. A regulator is like a referee. See, it's very tempting for a referee to go and kick the ball himself. But if a referee starts doing it, there will be chaos. So I'll make some brief remarks on warehousing per se and also respond to certain issues that have come up during Professor Naik's presentation. But before I begin, let me compliment Professor Gopal Naik on a very comprehensive presentation, sir. This is one of the best presentations I've heard of the warehousing sector. It covered all the issues, though I know that due to paucity of time, you could not go into the depth of each issue, but you have raised all the points. I look forward to reading your report, and I'm sure it will be a very valuable addition to the literature on the subject. Now, having said this, let me just make some few remarks about warehousing as I understand it. First thing that lesson that was given to me when I joined this sector a long time back. I worked as food secretary, general manager of a civil supplies corporation. I was in the Ministry of Food also. Is that warehousing is not just about storage. The common man thinks that warehousing is all about storage, but storage is the backbone, but warehousing goes much beyond storage. It also deals with various ancillary services like cleaning, grading, standardization, packaging, invoicing, handling, transportation, all of which goes on to create wealth for the depositor, whether he's a farmer or a trader and so on. And if wealth has to be created, it's not enough to store the goods in the warehouse. You have to do all these activities. And what is the most important activity? As far as I see it now, one really important activity is pledge financing. Using the warehouse receipt to get money in at the right time so that you can sell your product when the markets are better and get what is rightfully your due. And this is where WDRA comes in a big way, because we guarantee the electronic negotiable warehouse receipt, which is a document of title which mentions the quantity and the quality of the goods and which can be used for easy pledge financing and trading. Now, before I come to WDRA issues, now a few thoughts about the sector in general. I will not speak much about it because Professor Naik has done a very comprehensive job, as I have already mentioned. Now, the agri warehousing sector in the country is large. The NABARD survey, which says that there are about 1,05,000 warehouses in the country, out of which 9,000 are perhaps defunct, they are not functioning. Now, however, this large capacity has got certain drawbacks because, as Professor Naik has mentioned, it's a fragmented sector. Standards differ across warehouses. And perhaps there is an issue that many of the warehouses are not close to the farm gate. They are not really as close to farmers as it should be. So there is definitely a case for improving the quality of the warehousing sector and getting more quality warehouses at the farm gate level, which I think should be the objective of all of us in this room today. So, having said this, let me just come to this thing about regulation of warehouses. Now, regulation of warehouses should cover this lacuna about different standards, lack of standard operating procedures and so on, because the regulator would be able to willy-nilly nudge the warehouse operators or maybe even make it mandatory for warehouse operators to have certain standards for the infrastructure and for the standard operating procedure. This will of course go a long way in stopping wastage of stored goods and will have myriads of other benefits. Now, enactment of the WDRA Act in 2007 was a step in this direction because WDRA first of all prescribes basic infrastructure for the warehouses based upon BIS standards, FCI standards and so on. We also laid down these SOPs, standard operating procedures for keeping stocks, fumigation, preservation and so on. And As has been mentioned here, our standards are a bit stringent, but there are certain things that cannot be relaxed. Like for example, we cannot register a warehouse which has no plinth height. The plinth height is 0. If we register it, we will not be doing our duty. There are many things where we can relax, and we should relax, but certain standards we have to maintain certain absolute standards. We cannot say, for example, that fumigation cycles should not be there, you can ignore it. These standards have to be kept. But having said that, certain standards, of course, we have to be practical, we have to take into account the needs of the trade, and as long as the baby is not being thrown out with the bath water, we should take steps which are practical in nature. Now, we have taken lots of steps in the recent past in consultation with the government to make our systems more user-friendly. We had a transformation plan in 2014. The receipt was digitized, and our entire registration of warehouses with WDRA is actually quite seamless. There is very little interaction with the warehouse man, and it is all done online. There are just some physical inspections. Now, many concessions in warehouse registration have been given, because the point was made out that perhaps registration of warehouses with WDRA would be more costly to the warehouse operator. The figures given were 70% full capacity for private warehouses. The warehouseman manages to break even, but with WDRA registered warehouses, the capacity utilization has to go up to 76%. It's not much of a difference, but still the difference is there. In order to obviate such issues, we have done things like waiving of registration fees in certain cases and giving concessions across the board to farmers, farmer producer organizations, cooperatives, and so on. Like to cite one instance, as far as net worth requirements of warehousemen are concerned, if the warehouse is run by a cooperative or by a farmer producer organization, all we say is that the net worth should be positive. We don't insist on much larger net worth. Now, the question that begs asking is, why do we insist on these standards? The first thing is that we have the safety, security, and the welfare of the depositors and the banks in mind. That is our primary concern. If somebody deposits goods in a WDRA warehouse, then he should get it back without the goods getting spoiled. If a bank has given a loan, then if the loan gets defaulted, he should not come back and see that the goods are spoiled or the goods were never there. Now, all these conditions are there to ensure the safety and security of the depositors and bankers. And in this process, probably the warehouseman may have to pay a little bit extra. But we are in a continuous process of trying to reduce the regulatory burden on the warehouseman. This may not be the time to give a lecture on all the measures that we are proposing, but one point that has been mentioned, I think I can say something about it. It was mentioned that the insurance burden of goods, keeping goods in WDRA warehouses is on the higher side. Perhaps so, because what we do now is that we charge the insurance based upon the capacity of the warehouse. Now, if the warehouse has a 1,000-ton capacity, then we say you have to take insurance for 1,000 tons based upon a certain rent cost per ton. Now, we thought about this, and we thought, how do we reduce the burden on the warehouseman? One thing that came to our mind was that, look, the entire thing is digitized in any case. So we would know exactly how much goods are there in the warehouse which have been deposited by various people. So why don't we charge the insurance based upon the actual deposits and not on the capacity? If somebody's got the warehouse capacity of 1,000 tons and is using only 700 metric tons, we should charge the insurance only on 700 metric tons. And this you can arrive at a mathematical formula to impose a certain amount of insurance every month. It can be topped up or topped down depending upon the requirements of the warehouse. We are in the process of doing this. Now, I will also now talk about one more point, that is with regard to pledge financing and warehouse registration, which has been mentioned in Professor Naik's speech. Now, if there are about 1,05,000 warehouses in the country, how many warehouses have WDRA? How many of it has WDRA registered? The current registration figure, the total number of warehouses stands at 2,750. But this figure is a bit misleading. Let me explain this figure. If there are 1 lakh warehouses in the country, let me tell you that only about 40,000 warehouses or 35,000 warehouses would be public warehouses. The rest are captive warehouses, warehouses that belong to organizations like FCI or ITC, where they keep their own stock. WDRA does not register captive warehouses. We register only public warehouses where depositors from outside, third parties come and keep their stock, where banks give loans against this third party stock. So our 2,750 warehouses should be seen against a denominator of 35 to 40,000 warehouses. Then again, the number of warehouse the registrations has been increasing slowly but steadily. Last month we registered 163 warehouses, which was the highest number of warehouses registered by WDRA since inception. And I would request you to do one thing: don't look at the absolute figures, look at the growth rates. See at the rate at which it is growing. Now this is the age of startups and valuations, and companies are valuated at fairly huge amounts depending upon their potential. So when you look at a new ecosystem like WDRA, please rate it on the potential and encourage it. I think that's very important, and that is the objective way of looking at it. And why has registration increased? Partly it's because people have understood to some extent, understood the benefits of WDRA registration. I won't say that's very much. But the other thing was again the point that Professor Naik had mentioned. Government has given us support. I mean, there has been decisions that, say, for example, FCI would keep its stock, if it is keeping it outside its own captive warehouses, only in WDRA registered warehouses or where they have applied for WDRA registration. Now, these are things which encourage the private sector to come to WDRA, and we've had a lot of warehouses which have applied, and many state warehousing corporations have also applied, because the bulk of the state warehousing corporation business, a good part of it comes from FCI business. So these are little things that help in increasing WDRA registration, which in turn helps in improving the warehousing standards in the country, which is a desirable goal, which is something which the public requires. And it will also bring down the colossal loss of food grains that we have. I won't say colossal, large loss of food grains we have. So these are all measures towards the national good, and I think as a people we should support it. Now, I'd also mention some facts about pledge financing by banks. The RBI has been kind enough to mention us in its master circular on priority sector lending. It has mentioned the electronic negotiable warehouse receipt as an instrument against which loans can be given. This has been done after my predecessors in office had petitioned RBI, gone there and convinced them. Now, banks are showing a renewed interest in pledge financing. In fact, to give you some figures, the year before last, the total pledge financing against ENWR was roughly on the order of 700 crores. Last year, we did 1,400 crores. Now, this year, in the first 2 months, we have already covered 500 crores. So again, I get back to my point. Please look at the growth rates and look at the absolute figures. These are very, very positive figures, and I'm sure that banks would understand, and the tremendous advantages, I won't even call it advantages, the inevitability of going towards a digital system of lending. The whole country is rushing towards digitization. In fact, India is doing very well on this score in terms of digital money, cell phone penetration, internet penetration, and so on. Now, why should the warehouse receipt financing remain behind? I mean, it doesn't stand to logic. And WDRA has the first mover advantage, because we have digitized our warehouse receipts right from 2017. In 2019, we issued orders saying that no negotiable warehouse receipt would be on paper. It would only be a digitized receipt. And we are not the only ones now. Some state warehousing corporations have got onto the game. Madhya Pradesh State Warehousing Corporation, Maharashtra State Warehousing Corporation, they have all digitized their receipts. But we have the first mover advantage, that we are the first organization to back digitized receipts, and the advantage of digitized receipts has been realized by banks. particularly private sector banks. They have all gone in, they have put in system for lending against digitized receipts, and the PSBs are also now behind, and we are contacting them, and I'm sure that it's only a matter of time that before our loading goes up. We are not trying to replace anybody, we are just looking at our absolute figures. We just want to have more warehouses which have got proper infrastructure and proper procedures, and we want more loans to be given to the farmer, and we want these loans to be given at the click of a button. Wherein a farmer who has got a negotiable warehouse receipt can give it to a bank, and because the bank trusts us, it gives a loan immediately without too much delay, without too much paperwork. And if the loan defaults, the goods should be there for the bank to sell off. The repository has got a platform for auctioning the goods. Now, once this realization comes in, then I'm sure it's obvious to the dumbest mind where the advantage lies. And what is WDRA's role? We have to maintain the sanctity of the receipt. We have to ensure that the stock is good and the stock is there. So, again, with regard to warehousing in the country, agri warehousing in the country, one last point. Now, this is with regard to the budget announcements of 2022, which has also been alluded to earlier. These are very, very encouraging, and this budget announcements has increased the amount of money to be put into warehousing, gives greater emphasis towards infrastructure creation in agriculture. Sector is expected to move towards an era of smart agriculture, and there are provisions for enhancing agriculture infrastructure through schemes like RKVY, Raftar, MIDH, AIF, and so on. And this has to be implemented through NABARD, through startups in agriculture and rural emphasis. There is greater emphasis on promoting SNGs and establishing the agri value chain and so on. And I'm sure that these very positive announcements and objectives will play a great role in improving agri warehousing in the country. But only thing I'd like to add is that when these warehouses come up, we must ensure that they are registered with WDRA, and these warehouses are of the right standard, and they are of the right, and they have the integrity of the receipts they are issuing. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you for having invited me to this. As I said, I'm a referee. I really don't want to play the game. I have to decide things on the rules and regulations. So it was very nice to hear all these issues. I look forward to reading the report. Thank you. Thank you so much.